Hello, my name is Mark. Welcome to Dramas, Dreams, and Drollery. Today I have for you one of my best murder mystery stories. In August of 2012, my wife and I were touring the magnificent site in San Antonio, California, known as the Huntington. In its rose garden, I spotted a flower with the name Abra, Cadaver. And instantly, I thought that Abra, Cadaver would make a wonderful title for a murder mystery, combining homicide with magic. Unfortunately, the story that I concocted is a bit long, so I have divided it into two parts. Today you will hear part one. The conclusion will be presented March 15th. While waiting for part two, you can join the puzzled detective of the story to determine who committed the crime, how, and why. Okay, here now is Abra, Cadaver. Meet Wasim Najib of Los Angeles, California. The son of Syrian immigrants, he has the Middle Eastern features you might expect. Short stature, dark skin, black wavy hair, and one of those thin mustaches. In spite of his mid-20s age, he's already starting to bald. Now, if you're a xenophobe from Peoria or Biloxi, don't give up on me yet. This isn't a story about terrorism in America. Wasim is a detective. That puts him on the side of law and order. He's one of the good guys. But don't conjure up the image of a hard-boiled, ignorant gumshoe. That would just prove you've been watching too many old Humphrey Bogart movies. Inside the man is neither a shrewd, mercantile mind, despite a business tradition in his family, nor a fanatical Muslim soul, despite a mother who zealously practices the Islamic faith. When he first arrived in the United States at age 16, Wasim had been a sober-minded youth. But American high school, and especially 4 years at the University of California at Santa Cruz, transformed him into a carefree, sociable, practical joker to the dismay of his parents. This isn't to say that the man lacks brains. He knows when to be cool and when to be smart. Wasim is a woman chaser. Blondes are his favorite companions. Corinne Vischer, the current girlfriend, is a blonde courtesy of the bottle. From the young man's point of view, Corinne is perfect. She's beautiful and docile. Whatever Corinne says, Wasim says goes. Whereas many women tire of his ceaseless pranks, Corinne loves them even when she's the object of deception. What distinguishes Wasim from conventional detectives is his playful, irreverent nature and his obsession with magic. To him, the greatest people who ever lived were Houdini and Blackstone. Wasim knows intimate details of their lives and many of their tricks. When not solving crimes, he practices magic. From memory, he knows hundreds of card and sleight of hand tricks. Recently, he's been trying to master grander skills like levitation. One day, he may give up police work and make magic his career. On this Sunday evening in October, the detective is unusually excited. He and Corinne are about to view a performance by Mr. Macabre, the world's greatest living magician and practitioner of an unorthodox brand of magic. The entertainer calls himself Mr. Macabre because all of his tricks involve the bizarre and occult. His art is truly black magic. At tonight's performance in Hollywood, Mr. Macabre has promised to do the impossible. Before a large gathering of spectators and the eyes of a worldwide television audience, he will die and then return to life. If he can pull this one off, he'll surpass Blackstone and Houdini, said Wasim excitedly to Corinne as he turned his BMW into the parking lot at the House of Wonder. The air was cool and crisp as they descended from the vehicle. Searchlights flashed in the sky. A clamorous crowd that included many journalists and professional magicians clustered about the entrance. The event had been sold out for months. Walking down the theater aisle, Wasim could sense a tension in the air and in the voices of friends who greeted him. Everyone in the profession of magic understood that this performance was a milestone in the history of their craft. Anticipating a sellout, Wasim had obtained tickets early. He and Corinne were seated only 7 rows from the stage. The show began in spectacular fashion. Mr. Macabre, a short, supple man wearing all black attire and grotesque makeup, ate, or appeared to eat, a live pigeon. While the shocked audience gazed at feathery residue on the floor, he reproduced the pigeon out of thin air. The crowd roared with delight. Wasim confessed to Corinne that he didn't know how to do the illusion. For the next 2 hours, the magician performed one unique trick after another. The detective had never seen any of them. Wasim was spellbound. Although enjoying every stunt, he couldn't wait for the big one. Finally, the moment arrived. Mr. Macabre addressed the audience solemnly. The line between life and death is very fine. 1 second of time or 1 inch of space can make the difference. We all know this. Until now, we have also believed that the line can only be crossed in one direction, from life to death, never from death to life. Tonight, I'm going to achieve the impossible. I shall cross the line from life to death, and then I shall return to life. No one since Jesus Christ has accomplished this feat. The speaker hesitated while spectators conversed excitedly. I warn you that my death will be violent. Therefore, the faint of heart might wish to withdraw from the theater. Take a moment to reflect. More than a moment of complete silence followed. I see no movement among you, so I shall proceed. For this event, I will be assisted by the lovely Bridget Thurston and the handsome Thor Stromberg. To the applause of the audience, the assistants appeared from behind the curtain. Clad in a sheer red costume that exposed arms and legs, Bridget carried a small stepladder. Bare-chested, muscular, and in silver pants, Thor transported a wooden table. After the aides had placed their props on stage, Mr. Macabre resumed his speech. 3 additional elements are required for this exercise. Here is the first. Out of thin air, the magician produced a gleaming sword. This action drew oohs and ahs from onlookers. Now for the final pieces. As Macabre waved the sword overhead, 2 coffins floated into view and hovered one above the other, parallel to the front edge of the stage. The audience murmured as the magician guided the lower coffin into place upon the table. After Thor had passed a large ring around the still levitating coffin, Mr. Macabre addressed the spectators again. I've been told that among you is a member of the Los Angeles Police Department, Detective Wasim Najib. I wonder if he would come on stage to assist me. Shocked, Wasim stared in disbelief at Corinne. He had not expected the great Mr. Macabre to include him in the performance. Composing himself, the lawman slowly rose from his seat and stepped on stage while the audience applauded. First, Mr. Najib, I must ask if you have ever met me before, or if anyone from my staff has contacted you about the illusion. No, certainly not. I know you only by reputation. Fine. I've asked for your assistance because police detectives are known for their sharp powers of observation and for their knowledge of weapons. Please examine this sword and assure the audience that it is a genuine weapon capable of killing a human being. Wasim took the sword in his hands, examined it carefully, noted the sharp tip and edge, and returned it to the magician. Yes, that could certainly kill a man. Macabre now made an orange appear out of thin air. For the skeptics who think that Mr. Najib might be a prearranged partner in this trick, let me demonstrate that the sword is real and sharp. With a swift stroke of the blade, Macabre cut the orange in half. Appropriately, I have used a blood orange, said the magician with a smile as he squeezed blood drops on the floor. Now, Mr. Najib, I want you to scrutinize the coffins. Although you may lack a mortician's knowledge, see if the caskets contain anything other than their padded lining. My assistants will open them for your inspection. Bridget Thurston opened the coffin on the table, Stor Thromberg the one suspended in midair. Wasim circled the former and climbed the stepladder to examine the latter, using eyes and hands to vet both. I would say that these are ordinary coffins with no unusual features, except that the one on the table has a slit on the side. Mr. Macabre smiled. Good observation, he said. That slit is for the sword that will execute me. In a moment, I will place myself inside that coffin. Bridget will close the lid. Then Thor will plunge the sword through the slit into my body. Incidentally, he has practiced making fast, hard lunges. I should die almost instantly. Afterward, Thor, Bridget, and additional assistants will carry my coffin and the table off stage, leaving the second coffin suspended in the air. If all goes as planned, within minutes after the removal of my dead body, I shall reappear alive inside the coffin that hovers over the stage, the coffin which will have been before your eyes the entire time. Bridget will then climb the stepladder, open that coffin, and escort me back down to the stage. Murmurs passed through the audience before Macabre's final words. All great magic tricks have a narrow margin for error. Although I have prepared this experiment scrupulously and possess complete confidence that it will succeed, there exists a possibility that it will fail. In the event of my death, neither Bridget nor Thor nor any other person associated with this performance should feel guilt or receive blame. I alone bear responsibility for the outcome. Allowing for that tiny bit of failure, I must bid goodbye to you fans, to my assistants, and to all those who have supported my career. Farewell to my brother Daniel, to my special friend Judith Rensler, and to life. Macabre paused for a moment as if in prayer. Then he moved slowly towards the coffin. There was utter silence in the theater. The reality of imminent death began to sink into the minds of the spectators. Some of them clutched the arms of their seats or the hands of partners. Others mouthed silent prayers. Wasim stood transfixed at the edge of the stage. His eyes were wide open and his mouth was dry. Watching Macabre step into the coffin, he asked himself why he felt so tense. This was just an illusion, or was it? What illusion ever included the death of a man? Was Macabre trying to go beyond the limits of human power? Wasim wanted to grab the magician's arm and stop the procedure, but he didn't. Bridget closed the lid. With the sword in hand, Thor took his place beside the coffin. As he aligned the weapon to enter the slit, observers strained to control their emotions. One female spectator fainted into the arms of her husband. A drum roll off stage signaled the approaching event. When it ended with a loud beat, Thor thrust the sword through the slit with great force. Several women shrieked. The shock wave that passed through the theater was followed by an abrupt silence. People seemed incapable of believing that they had just witnessed the execution of Mr. Macabre. Within seconds, the silence was broken by chaotic outbursts of babbling, shouting, and even laughing. Many observers were on their feet, unsure what to do. They sat down when Bridget, Thor, and other aides carried the coffin and table off stage. Silence reigned again. All eyes were fixed upon the levitating casket. Like Wasim, everyone wondered whether the scene they had just witnessed constituted an illusion of magic or the slaying of a human being. Would the magician step out of the other coffin alive? After a lengthy delay, Bridget and Thor returned to the stage. The lovely assistant looked at her watch. Apparently, the resurrection required more time. An anxious minute or two passed. Finally, Bridget climbed the ladder and opened the lid of the coffin. The smile on her face gave way to a gasp of despair. She stumbled down the stepladder, sobbing uncontrollably. The audience needed no announcement. The experiment had failed. Mr. Macabre was dead. Pandemonium struck the theater. Amid the tumult, some people ran for the exits, but Wasim, the detective and amateur magician, burned to know about the levitating coffin. Was it empty or filled with a dead body? He ran across the stage, climbed the stepladder, and looked inside the casket. There was Macabre in his black garment and grotesque makeup. Checking for vital signs, Wasim concluded that the entertainer was dead. The body had a severe wound in the side of the thorax, just about the place where the sword had been thrust. Other spectators were trying to come on stage. Wasim waved them back. Then he located stage manager Paul Morneau. Identifying himself as a policeman, Wasim instructed the man to ring down the curtain, to close off the stage and backdoor areas, and to prevent theatrical personnel from leaving the theater. A hurried call to headquarters from his cell phone gained the detective permission to take charge of the investigation. It was easy to convince Chief Reedley. After all, Wasim was a veteran lawman, an amateur magician, an eyewitness to the death of the victim, and a man already on site. After securing the potential crime scene, the detective sent Corrine home in the BMW. Then he summoned Bridget Thurston and Thor Stromberg for interrogation. Too upset to talk, the former was allowed some time to recover. The latter manifested genuine sorrow and expressed a willingness to cooperate with the investigation. He affirmed that the trick was performed exactly as we rehearsed it. Mr. Macabre never explained to Bridget and me how it worked, but we knew that Macabre was very thorough in his preparations. Not for an instant did either of us think that he might die. It was a magic act, an illusion. So I stuck the sword into the coffin with full confidence that Macabre would survive. Later, when they said he was dead, I was as shocked as anyone in the audience. Wasim asked Macabre's assistant to show him where he and others had carried the coffin during the act. Thor led the detective to a dark corner backstage. Resting on the floor was the coffin that had the slit. Beside it stood the table with the sword still on top of it. Obtaining a flashlight, Wasim studied the objects carefully. He noted scant blood on the sword. Even the coffin seemed to lack blood, although there were faint smears on the lining. Thor assured the investigator that he had touched none of the objects since carrying them off stage. While Wasim was pondering this evidence, the young man volunteered an interesting piece of information. "There's a trapdoor in this corner backstage," he said. "I assumed that Mr. Macabre planned to get out of the coffin and go down through the trapdoor to the basement. But I never tried to check things out. He didn't want people to know how he did his tricks. I feared that I might lose my job if I asked too many questions." "So you have no idea how the body turned up in the other coffin?" "I haven't the slightest idea. My only connection with the levitating coffin was to pass a ring around it to show that it was not supported by a rope or a wire, and to open it for inspection by you." "What do you know about Mr. Macabre outside the theater?" "Almost nothing. He was a very private person. I think his contact with everybody in this theater was strictly professional." At this moment, members of the homicide squad arrived along with regular policemen for crowd control. Wasim assigned some of the homicide men to search the area and some to take the coffin, sword, and table to the crime lab for analysis. Obeying his instructions, stage personnel lowered the levitating coffin to the level of the stage. Soon thereafter, a representative of the coroner's office appeared. After examining the body, he told Wasim that the fatal wound had apparently come from a blade, very likely the sword used in the act. However, an autopsy would be needed to confirm this fact. By this time, Bridget Thurston had regained control of herself, but she could provide little information beyond that given by Thor Stromberg. "The trick was performed according to plan," she declared. I don't know the secret behind it. Mr. Macabre never told anyone. He kept everything to himself. He wasn't a very likable person. When I was hired, he told me not to ask questions, to follow his orders strictly, and to look beautiful, and that's all. But I'll tell you something very odd about him. He was terribly superstitious. Imagine that. A clever man who could plan logically down to the tiniest detail, and yet he was superstitious. Everyone who knew him laughed about it. Behind his back, of course, never to his face. He could get very angry. Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Macabre during the performance? No, I don't think so, except of course that he was dead when I opened the coffin. Neither Thor nor I really expected him to die. We thought that the assassination with the sword was just a dramatic illusion. It was a terrible shock to me to find him dead. Did you have any personal association with Mr. Macabre outside of work? No, truthfully, I didn't like him very much, and I don't think he liked any of us here in the theater. He had a surly attitude, and he always kept to himself. Next, Wasim turned to Paul Morneau, the stage manager. A dark-haired man of medium build and a deep voice, he provided Wasim with some useful information. Mr. Macabre's real name was Darby Delacroix. He lived in an isolated spot high in the Hollywood Hills with a girlfriend named Judy Rensselaer. Once he mentioned having a drunken brother who lived somewhere in Europe. Aside from these two people, I know of no one else to whom he was attached. Didn't Macabre explain to you how his trick worked? No, he didn't tell me a thing. I've worked with many magicians here at the House of Wonder, but I've never seen anyone as secretive as Macabre. At the time we arranged this performance, he made it clear that no one among the theatrical staff was to touch the coffins or any of the props connected with his act. He said he would take care of everything himself. I've been told there's a trapdoor in a corner backstage. Yes. To what does it connect? The basement. Show me, please. Standing in the basement directly beneath the trapdoor, Wasim surveyed a large empty space. A door caught his attention. Where does that door lead to? He asked. It's an exit to an alleyway. So, if Macabre did not die in the coffin, he could have climbed out of it in the corner, slipped down through the trapdoor, and left the theater through this door. Yes, that's right. That would have put him out on the street. But then, how could he have reappeared in the coffin over the stage? That's a good question, said Wasim, a puzzled look on his face. Are there any other ways to access the backstage? Well, there are steps on the front sides of the stage, the ones you used when Mr. Macabre called you up there. And of course, anyone using them, though, would be seen by the audience. The only other entry is the normal side door exit. Before and during performances, it is manned at all times by Charlie Paddock, a reliable employee who never admits unauthorized people. It was now after midnight. Theater workers were anxious to go home, and news reporters wanted a story. Before tending to these matters, the detective insisted on interviewing Charlie Paddock. Wasim said to him, Mr. Macabre's performance started at 8:30. When did you arrive? I unlocked the theater before every show. Today I got here about 4. So there was no one here before that hour? That's correct. Mr. Macabre was the next to arrive. He came about 4:30. He had a helper with him. They parked their van in the alleyway to unload equipment. Did you see what they were unloading? Oh, I saw the coffins, of course, but I really didn't pay much attention. Mr. Macabre doesn't like to have people snooping around his stuff. Did you recognize the man who was helping Mr. Macabre? No, he was a short man in a sweater. Because of the hood over his face, I didn't get a good look at him. Who came to the theater next? I'm not sure. About 5:30, several people arrived. The guys who handled the curtains and the lighting, Mr. Morneau, the ticket vendors. Did you notice anything unusual? No, except that Thor and Bridget came together and they seemed very friendly with each other, if you know what I mean. I know just what you mean, thought Wasim. Who wouldn't want to be friendly with a curvaceous blonde like that? Oh, one thing I almost forgot to ask. Did Mr. Macabre enter the theater in costume or in street clothing? Funny you should ask that. Every other magician comes here in street dress. Macabre arrived not only in costume, but with his makeup on. I've never seen that before. He did have a private dressing room, I suppose. Someplace he could relax before the performance. That's another strange thing. Macabre didn't want any of the usual dressing rooms we have. As a superstar, he was entitled to the best, but he requested and got a small room in the basement that had been used as a storage space. Was it near the exit? Yes, how'd you know? Well, a room near the exit would be the shortest distance from the street. Few people would have the opportunity to see him come and go. Whatever happened to the man who helped deliver the equipment? Did he stay during the performance or did he leave? Gee, I don't know. I saw him only when he was bringing things in. He could have left through the basement exit. I was stationed at the normal stage door entrance on the other side of the building. I can assure you that neither he nor Macabre passed through there. But no one was stationed at the basement door. Didn't need anyone. That door was locked at all times. You had to have a key to use it. Macabre had a key. How could Macabre get the coffins and other equipment from the basement to stage level? Oh, that's easy. Through the trapdoor, using a system of pulleys that we have in place. Okay, let me see Macabre's dressing room. Outside this room, while Paddock scanned his keychain for the proper key, Wasim tried the door handle and it opened. The light was already on. A short, dark-haired woman seemed to be caught off guard by the arrival of other people. She swiftly put something behind her back. Wasim was about to ask the person to identify herself, but Charlie Paddock saved him the effort. "That's Miss Rensselaer, Mr. Macabre's lady," he said. Indicating the lawman, he said to the woman, "This man is Mr. Najib. He's a policeman." Wasim nodded. As Paddock began to express his condolences, a radical change occurred in the woman's demeanor, from the look of one who's been caught doing wrong to the aspect of one who has suffered tragedy. It was an inferior job of acting. She'd never make it in films, thought Wasim. By pretending, however, this stranger became a person of high interest to the detective. He studied her face carefully. It was narrow, with sharp features and lines that suggested a life of hardship, but there were traces of faded beauty. The body was unusually trim and athletic for a woman in her mid-40s. The woman sat in an armchair while deftly keeping the object behind her back. Wasim recognized it as a newspaper. With her free hand, Macabre's companion took out a handkerchief and wiped away crocodile tears. Wasim played his part in the farce. He remained respectfully silent for a couple of minutes before saying, "I'm terribly sorry for your loss, Miss Rensselaer, but I must ask you some questions. Apparently you knew Mr. Delacroix better than anyone else in the world. Despite his great fame, no one here in the theater seemed to know much about him personally." That's because he had no friends except for me. He was a very private person." "So I gather. Did he have any relatives? Someone mentioned a brother." "Yes, he had a brother named Daniel, but that's all." "Does Daniel live nearby? I'd like to talk to him." "No, he's a wastrel who drifts from place to place in search of the next bar. We never knew where he would turn up. He and Darby didn't get along. Actually, they hated one another. They stopped communicating altogether about 5 years ago. Then last April, Daniel mailed a letter from Geneva, Switzerland, asking for money. He said that he was in big trouble with gamblers. Darby sent him $5,000. Frankly, I don't know why he complied. I think he was hoping for a reconciliation. About 2 or 3 months ago, Darby flew Air France to Paris, where he gave a show that was very well received. Afterwards, he flew to Geneva. He wanted to be there on August 7th, when Daniel turned 50. Despite Darby's upbeat attitude, nothing positive came from that visit. There was no reconciliation. I believe that's the last contact we had with Daniel. Please, may I go home now? Yes, I know it's very late, and you should have some time alone. However, I must ask you what you were doing here in this room. This is scarcely the place I'd expect to find a grieving, is it wife? No, we weren't married. Darby and I have been living together for the past 7 years. But I did love him, and I'm very loyal. That's why I came to this room. I was trying to protect his reputation. When a famous person dies, people want to collect souvenirs and to learn every detail of his life. I simply wanted to be sure there was nothing here that would cast him in a bad light. Did you find anything of that sort? No. Well, what are you holding behind your back? A sheepish look passed over the woman's face. Nothing, she said. Just a newspaper. I was tidying up the room. Mind if I look at it? No. Rensselaer handed the paper to the detective. It was a Geneva newspaper, the Nouveau Monde, dated October 2nd, 1979. I see the paper is just a few days old. Is it yours? No, I don't read French. Was it Darby's then? I don't know, I just found it here. And as I said, I was just cleaning up. Did Darby read French? A little. He grew up in Louisiana. All right then. That'll be it for tonight, but I must inspect Darby's residence. May I drop by tomorrow? I guess I should say later this morning at 11? Yes. Would you like a ride home? No, thank you. I have my car. After the woman's departure, Wasim made a brief search of the dressing room. He found nothing of interest. The room appeared to be immaculate. Was this due to Macabre or to his woman? After releasing the theater employees, the detective turned to the reporters. He told them that Macabre's death had probably been accidental, but that the investigation would continue. Before leaving the theater, Wasim made a careful tour of the building to be sure that everything was secure. It was at 2:30 that the exhausted man went to bed. The telephone awakened him at 8:45. It was Corinne with a barrage of questions about the previous evening. Weary and vexed by this interruption, Wasim treated his caller brusquely. After hanging up, he asked himself why women wanted to meddle in men's work. Later, while shaving, he recalled this conversation with regret. I guess I'll have to send her some flowers, he told himself. At 10, Wasim made a report by phone to Chief Reedley. He told his superior, there are some suspicious aspects of this case. I'm not totally convinced at this point that the death was accidental. I'll tell you more later. Right now, I've got an interview with the live-in partner of the deceased. The detective reached Macabre's residence right at 11, just as a Cadillac was leaving the property. Wasim stopped his own car abruptly in the driveway and jotted down the license number. While exiting his own vehicle, he gazed in wonder at the size and elegance of the house he was visiting. He noted how the jacarandas, the roses, and the wisteria enhanced the structure. Way more than a detective can afford, he thought. But then, what should one expect of a world-famous magician? A dry-eyed Judith Runzler escorted him to an office. This is where Darby planned and managed all of his professional activities. The rest of the house was strictly for personal use. And whose name is the house? Darby's. And who are the heirs of his estate? I assume he had a will. Yes, he did. I am the primary heir. Although we're not married, we have lived together for 7 years. He is the sole beneficiary of my will, by the way. You said that you were the primary heir of Darby's will. Were there others? Only Daniel. Darby left him a trifling sum, perhaps $10,000. Darby said that leaving more to an alcoholic would be a waste. Do you know the value of his estate? No, but the bulk of it is probably in the form of this house. You'd have to talk to Philip Humber about that. He's Darby's attorney and investment advisor. As he talked, Wasim searched through the desk and cabinets of the office. In a desk drawer, he found a faded photo of 2 boys and an adult male, presumably fishing at a river. Who are these people? The picture was taken in Louisiana. The boys are Darby on the left and Daniel on the right. Now, you can certainly tell the boys are brothers, but who's the man? Honestly, I don't know. I asked Darby. He said he didn't want to talk about that man. I'm sure he's neither Darby's father or uncle. I've seen pictures of them. Maybe it was a family friend. But all Darby's relatives, except for Daniel, are now deceased, aren't they? Probably this family friend, too? Well, as far as I know, Daniel is Darby's only living relative. Tell me how you met Darby. Well, I'm originally from Ohio, but I began my working career at a bank in Buffalo. One day I heard about a great job opportunity in Los Angeles. Having always wanted to visit California, I decided to go for it. I became a financial officer at the Excelsior Bank in this city. The year was 1972. I remember that the Watergate scandal was going on at that time. My first big job involved a loan to the House of Wonder. Working on the deal, I got to know Paul Morneau, the theater's stage manager. He's the one who introduced me to Darby. Despite his fame, Darby was not popular with many people. But I liked him, and he liked me. We began to date, and within 6 months, I moved in with him. Do you still work at the Excelsior? No, Darby was making good money, and he didn't want me to work. So I retired at age 45. The woman smiled in satisfaction. Did you help Darby with his illusions, and with this final stunt in particular? No, he didn't want me to. Darby was an extremely professional man. He wanted every stage maneuver to be perfect. To him, all details were important, not simply for safety, but for professional reasons. He was terribly ambitious. His goal was to be known as the greatest magician who ever lived. That's why he kept trying tricks that were more and more daring. I thought they were becoming too dangerous, and I begged him to stop. But he wouldn't listen. He insisted that he could surmount the risks. At this point, the woman realized that she was talking too normally. Abruptly, she feigned tears. Wasim allowed the charade to continue, even offering her the use of his handkerchief. After a couple of minutes, he resumed questioning. Tell me about last night's trick. Did he ever explain how it was to be performed? No, I'm not a magician. He rarely discussed such matters with me. All I know is that he was extraordinarily excited about it. He said, "This will be my greatest feat. It will elevate me to a unique level in the world of magic. I must guard the secret from competitors." Since you were in the dressing room afterward, I assume you attended the performance itself. Yes, I had a very good seat, perhaps 10 or 12 rows from the stage. Thought Wasim. That probably wasn't far from Corinne and me. I don't remember seeing her there, but my mind was on the performance. To the woman, he said, "You've undoubtedly attended many of his performances before. Did you notice anything last night that deviated from what you've been accustomed to seeing?" Well, you understand that this trick was unique. An awful lot of publicity had preceded it. As a consequence, the audience was unusually attentive. The atmosphere was incredible. But with regards to the trick itself, I saw nothing abnormal. Everything seemed to perform as expected. That is professionally, until, of course, the woman thought it appropriate at this time to express a little sorrow. She buried her face in her hands and uttered some low moans. After a moderate interval, during which Wasim rolled his eyes, the detective asked his final questions. Miss Rensselaer, do you believe that Darby's death was accidental? The woman sat up instantly as if insulted. Of course it was. Do you have any reason to believe otherwise? No, not at this time, but it's my duty to investigate all possibilities. Is there anyone you can think of who might have a motive for killing him? No, although he had no friends, I don't think he had enemies. As he prepared to leave, Wasim glanced about the office. A bright speck of paper in a wastebasket caught his eye. The detective requested a glass of water. While the hostess went to fulfill his request, he put the paper in a pocket. At the car, he examined his find. The torn corner of a large sheet of paper, it bore the letters LUFTH. Could this be the name of a business firm? A town? A person? Was it significant? Wasim had a hurried lunch at a fast food outlet on Sunset Boulevard. Arriving afterward at the police station, he learned with surprise that a beautiful blonde awaited him. It was Bridget Thurston. Alone with her in his office, Wasim felt his heart begin to pound. For a moment, he nearly forgot that he was on duty. Clearing his throat, he asked, "What can I do for you?" Smiling shyly, the woman responded, "Something happened last night that I didn't tell you about. My conscience has made me come here. I don't know if it's really important or not." "What is it?" "When Thor, the other assistants, and I carried the coffins, table, and sword, we placed them in the dark corner backstage, just as Mr. Macabre had instructed. After that, we were supposed to wait by the curtain for the signal to re-enter the stage. But I started getting nervous. Things were going too slowly, so I went back to the corner again. At that moment, I heard a noise from the basement. Pushing open the trapdoor just a little bit, I saw a man down there. He was wearing a jacket with a hood, and he was carrying a bag. Thinking that it must be Mr. Macabre, I called to him softly. The man seemed annoyed. He waved me away and whispered, 'Go back!' So I did what he said." "Are you sure it was Macabre?" "No, but who else could it have been?" "Why didn't you tell me this last night?" "I told Thor. He said I shouldn't say anything. I might get into trouble. Besides, he said it was probably just the workman who had helped Mr. Macabre load and unload his van." After the blonde had left, Wasim called into his office 2 of the policemen who had searched the theater and its surroundings on the previous evening. The only item of interest in their report was the news that a customer of a nearby bar had seen a green van parked in the alley behind the theater sometime after 4 p.m. He was gone when the man returned to the bar shortly before 11 p.m. How Wasim yearned to know the identity of the man in the jacket and hood. Was it or wasn't it Macabre? The van itself was a different matter. That should definitely be traceable. The detective telephoned the Department of Motor Vehicles and identified himself as a police officer. "I'm interested in 2 pieces of information," he said. "First, is a green van registered to Darby Delacroix of Los Angeles?" The answer was yes. "Okay, I also want to know who owns a late model Cadillac with a California license plate FM38277. Wasim's eyes opened wide when he heard the clerk respond, "A Paul Morneau of Brentwood." How interesting, thought Wasim. Why would Paul Morneau rush over to Judy Rensler's place the morning after the tragedy? Anxious for the coroner's report, the detective made another phone call. He was told that the report would be unavailable for hours, maybe days. The policeman reminded the other party that the autopsy of such a prominent figure should be given high priority. No sooner had Wasim concluded the call than he was ordered to report immediately to the office of Chief Reedley. The boss seemed agitated. "With all these reporters badgering me, I want to know what you're doing to clear up this case, Wasim. Don't you know it's a high-profile case? Step on it. I want this matter resolved soon." The detective said nothing, but he put on a sober mien and nodded his head in agreement. In his own office, Wasim called in the 2 policemen who had reported on the van. He told them, "Go to the Delacroix residence and bring back the van for analysis by the lab. Be careful not to disturb anything inside it." An hour later, the detective was at the Brentwood home of Paul Morneau. His first question was, "Why did you go to the Delacroix home this morning?" The stage manager appeared to be unsettled by the query. "What makes you think I was there?" he asked. "I was there, and I saw your Cadillac." Morneau responded slowly, as if stalling for time. "Well, I simply wanted to express my regrets to Macabre's lady. That's all? Yes. As long as I'm here, let me ask what I failed to ask last night. Can you think of any reason why Thor Stromberg or Bridget Thurston would want to kill Mr. Macabre? Surely you don't think that Darby Delacroix was murdered? I have to investigate all possibilities. What's the answer to my question? No, I don't think they particularly liked him, but I know of no motive to kill. What about yourself? Did you have a reason to kill him? Certainly not. Why, the idea is ridiculous. I had every reason to keep him alive. Mr. Macabre was a fantastic hit. The theater was profiting enormously from his act. His death was just a tragic accident. Are you married, Mr. Morneau? No, I'm not, but why do you ask? Oh, it's not important. Returning to the office, Wasim was greeted by the policeman that he'd sent to the Delacroix home. They reported that the van was not there and that Miss Rensselaer had no idea where it was. That's not surprising, thought Wasim. Making that van disappear would be child's play for one who performed last night's magic. It was late afternoon. Still feeling the effects of insufficient sleep, the detective wanted to go home, but he lingered for a while in his desk chair, reflecting on the day's discoveries. Judy Rensselaer had lived with Darby Delacroix for 7 years, yet she wasn't genuinely sorrowful at his death. Moreover, she was effectively the deceased sole beneficiary. Why did Paul Morneau pay her a visit only hours after the tragedy? Was Bridget Thurston telling the truth about the mysterious man in the hooded jacket? And who was that man? If Bridget did tell the truth, why did Thor Stromberg advise her not to talk to the police? Wasim's head began to swim with all the questions. Before leaving the office, he ordered an aide to find out all that he could about Paul Morneau. The weary lawman just wanted to go home and sleep, but he couldn't. He had to patch up things with Corinne. At Lowry's florist, he purchased a large bouquet of chrysanthemums, her favorite flowers. When Wasim handed them to her, she reciprocated by inviting him in for dinner. The detective wanted to decline. He knew that she would pester him with questions. Despite his fatigue, Wasim accepted the invitation with a smile. How could he refuse? To aggravate the situation, Corinne was up to her inept self in the kitchen. In Wasim's opinion, his girlfriend couldn't boil water properly. The spaghetti was undercooked, the sauce ran thinly, and the Brussels sprouts were terribly bitter. Then, during dinner, came the endless chain of questions. Wasim warded them off as diplomatically as possible. Suddenly, one question hit home. Who got Macabre's life insurance? Wasim had wholly ignored that question. He had asked Judy Rensselaer about the magician's estate in general, but he had not inquired specifically about life insurance. Did Macabre have such a policy? And if so, who was its beneficiary? The detective went to sleep that night thinking about life insurance. At 9 the next morning, Wasim received the report on Paul Morneau. Born Montreal, Canada, February 6, 1931. Educated at McGill University. Trained and worked at various theatrical academies. Stage manager of the Bosco Theater in Buffalo, New York, 1966 to 1972. Stage manager of the House of Wonder, Hollywood, California, 1972 to 1979. Left Buffalo in 1972, Wasim said out loud. Why, Judy Rensselaer left Buffalo that same year. Puzzling over this coincidence, the detective remembered Judy's words about her first big job with the Excelsior Bank in Los Angeles. Working on the loan to the House of Wonder, I got to know Paul Morneau. Instantly, Wasim wondered if they had known one another in Buffalo. Another idea came on the heels of this one. Paul Morneau is French-Canadian. Was he the owner of that newspaper in Macabre's dressing room? The detective arranged an appointment for 2 that afternoon with the director of the Excelsior Bank. David Cartwright remembered well his former employee. Yeah, Judy Rensler was a very bright woman. I actually thought she might replace me when I retired. But about 4 years ago, I discovered shortages in our funds. Judy told me there was nothing wrong. According to her, apparent losses were simply accounting errors that could be rectified. She spouted off formulas and mathematical terms that I didn't understand, but she seemed to know what she was talking about, and I trusted her. However, over time, the losses persisted. Finally, I hired an outside auditor. He told me that without question, Judy was stealing money from the bank. The shortage amounted to about $60,000. I discharged her without pressing charges. I wanted to avoid bad publicity for the bank. Besides, there was still the matter of the big loan to the House of Wonder. I didn't want to upset Paul Morneau. A startled Wasim sat straight up in his chair. Why would charging Judy Rensler with crime upset Paul Morneau, he asked. Why, they were lovers. The two of them came together to Los Angeles from Buffalo. It's true that Judy moved in with that Macabre fellow soon after their arrival, but I was convinced that she and Paul were still sweet on each other long after that. Just before I fired Judy, I unintentionally overheard the two of them talking in Judy's office one day. Believe me, the conversation didn't sound like all business, but it was none of my affair. Maybe the woman was just using her sex appeal to keep Paul's business. Late that afternoon at police headquarters, Wasim encountered Chief Reedley by chance in a hallway. The latter inquired anxiously, "Making any progress on the case?" The detective didn't know how to respond. Was it going to be like this every day from now on? He finally said, yes, I'm making progress. Still looks very suspicious. Things may get clearer when I get the autopsy report. The chief replied, okay, don't forget to tell me whenever something important develops. This is a high-profile case, you know. Wasim called Paul Morneau's home phone number. There was no answer. He decided to visit the House of Wonder again. Perhaps the stage manager was there. If not, it wouldn't hurt to have another look at the scene of the potential crime. With luck, he found the man in his office, but the frown on Morneau's face was not inviting. I'm rather busy right now, Detective Najib, he said. With Macabre's death, there's much to do around here. Can whatever you want wait until another day? Sorry, this interview is necessary because you and Judith Rensler were not honest with me. What do you mean? I've just learned that the two of you were an intimate pair back in Buffalo and that you came together to Los Angeles. Well, that's true, but it has nothing to do with the death of Darby Delacroix, doesn't it? The love triangle has always been a prime motive for murder. You arrive in Los Angeles with a girl on your arm, and a magician steals her away. It really wasn't like that. In 1972, the relationship between Judy and me wasn't strong. When Delacroix came along, I kind of stepped aside. I had no hard feelings against him. I have a witness who suggests that you and Miss Rensler continued your relationship even after Delacroix became involved. That's not true. Judy and I did talk to each other on occasion, but only because business drew us together. I did not want Macabre dead. Why don't you go after people who really had a motive for murder? Thor Stromberg, for instance. Thor Stromberg? Why do you name him? Probably nobody hated Delacroix more. Considering what a high-profile case this is, you should know that by now. But the look on your face suggests that you haven't been doing your job. Better get with it. Internally, Wasim seethed. Even the suspects were pressuring him. He swallowed some saliva before saying, "Suppose you tell me your version of Mr. Stromberg's motives." Thor Stromberg was Macabra's whipping boy. Any little mishap at rehearsals was always Thor's fault. Delacroix accused him of everything, from stupidity to premeditated murder. To his face, he called him derogatory names like Dumbird, Strom the Bomb, and Thor the Boar. Once, in front of the entire theater crew, he dressed him up and down mercilessly for some trivial blunder. All of us bystanders were embarrassed. Premeditated murder, you say? Tell me about that. Oh, I don't think Delacroix literally meant murder. He often exaggerated, but he always stressed safety. He said he would die if things weren't done right. On the occasion that he mentioned premeditated murder, Thor had deviated from the script just enough to add an unnecessary element of risk. Why did Macabre pick on Stromberg? Was he clumsy or careless all the time? Not really. Thor was human. He made a few mistakes, but I doubt that he was more inept than anyone else. Then why all that abuse? I really don't know. Macabre might have been motivated by jealousy. Thor was young, handsome, and strong, whereas Delacroix was physically unexceptional. Maybe the magician wanted to demonstrate his superior intellectual powers over this handsome young man of average intelligence. And then again, it might have something to do with Judy Rensselaer. The abuse began shortly after Delacroix saw his woman flirting with a young man. I remember the incident well. Macabre was furious at the time. Afterward, I heard Judy tell him that Stromberg had made a play for her. Apparently, she was convincing. Frankly, I don't believe it. I knew Judy. She was a very fickle woman. That's one reason I let her go. Why did Stromberg put up with Macabre's abuse? Well, he had no choice. Thor's mother is seriously ill in a hospital. She needs a costly operation. Despite the abuse, Thor made good money working for Macabre, and that paid for his mother's treatment. He couldn't find another job that paid as well. Actually, he desperately needed more money for the operation. Thank you, Mr. Morneau. I think that's all. Oh, one last question. Being a French Canadian, you do read French, don't you? Yes, responded the stage manager with a puzzled look on his face. As Wasim started to walk away, one question was on his mind. If Thor was desperate for money, how could he have profited from the death of Macabre? Abruptly, he turned back and asked, "Do you think it's possible that Thor was having a love affair with Judy Rensselaer?" I suppose it's possible. As I said before, Judy is a fickle woman. Before going home, Wasim sent messages calling Thor Stromberg and Judy Rensselaer to appointments in his office on the following morning at 9 and 10, respectively. The handsome young man was waiting impatiently when the detective arrived at 10 minutes after 9. "I hope this won't take long, Mr. Najib," he said. "Now that I'm out of a job, I need to find work at once." "I understand. I'll make this as brief as possible. There are 3 things I'd like to discuss with you. The first concerns Bridget Thurston. She says you advised her not to tell me about the man she saw in the basement during Macabre's trick. Is that what you told her? And if so, why?" I did tell her that. I figured it was just a workman who helped carry in the equipment. Talking about him would complicate matters. It might even lead police to suspect me or Bridget. I said it was best to keep things simple. Anyway, it really wasn't important. Macabre's death was just an accident. It wasn't wise of you to decide what was important. Police need to know all the facts. Then they can decide what's important. Let's turn now to the second question. People say that your employer treated you very badly, that he abused and humiliated you. Is that true? Yes, he was always unfair. Frankly, I didn't like him. Did you hate him? Maybe. Enough to kill him? Hey, wait a minute. What are you trying to do? I said I didn't like him. I didn't say I wanted to kill him. I needed that job. What could I gain by killing him? Well, that leads me to question number 3. It's true, isn't it, that you were having a love affair with Judy Rensselaer? That's crazy. Certainly not. Judy Rensselaer is the primary heir of Darby Delacroix. A romance with her might lead you in time to gain a piece of Macabre's legacy. You're going way too far. I'm not talking to you anymore until I see a lawyer. Judy Rensselaer was 10 minutes late for her appointment. As soon as she was seated, she said, "Before you interrogate me, Mr. Najib, let me offer some information that might be of use to you. You asked me if I knew of anyone with a motive to kill Darby. Personally, I believe his death was an accident, a magic trick gone awry. But I understand your need to consider all possibilities. Therefore, I want to tell you about a man who could have gained enormously by Darby's death. His name is Dr. Sanjay Prithawal. About a year ago, Darby broke an arm doing one of his dangerous illusions. For treatment, he consulted Dr. Prithawal. Unfortunately, the doctor was not as skillful in his profession as Darby was in magic. The result was a bungled job of resetting the arm. Darby was furious and fearful of losing the ability to perform some stunts successfully. He sued the doctor for a very large sum of money. The legal action is scheduled for court next week. Twice during the past year, Dr. Prithawal had phoned Darby imploring him to withdraw the suit. He said that bad publicity alone could destroy his practice. But my friend was a stubborn and vindictive person. He would not abandon the case. That is certainly interesting. I'll look into it. Thank you for providing this information. Now let's turn to other matters. Darby's green van has mysteriously vanished. I know nothing about that. I've never even been in it. Darby used it exclusively for his magic acts. As I told you before, he was always terribly secretive about everything connected with his illusions. Do you know anything about a man in a hooded jacket who may have accompanied Mr. Delacroix to the theater on the night of his death? No, can't help you there either. When I inquired about Darby's estate, I forgot to ask if he had life insurance. Yes, and I am his beneficiary. But the policy was for a trifling sum. I don't recall exactly how much. Now, Miss Rensselaer, I must turn to an unpleasant matter. You led me to believe that you quit working at the Excelsior Bank because that was the wish of Mr. Delacroix. But Mr. Cartwright at the bank says you were discharged for embezzlement. That's absurd. I didn't steal anything. There were some irregularities in the accounting records, and I was falsely accused. The guilty party, perhaps Mr. Cartwright himself, used me as a scapegoat. With a little research, you will see that I was not prosecuted. That's because the case against me would not hold up in court, and it might have inculpated someone else. There's a personal matter that I must ask about. Since 1972, the year of your arrival in Los Angeles, and the year that you took up residence with Darby Delacroix, have you had love affairs with either Paul Morneau or Thor Stromberg? It's outrageous that you should ask. What I do personally is my business. You're supposed to be investigating the death of Darby. Well, there's a possibility that his death was not accidental. In that case, a motive for murder becomes very important. Surely it must be clear to you that as Darby's primary heir, you would have to be regarded as a prime suspect. If I'm a suspect, I don't wish to speak to you any further. From now on, consult Philip Humber, my attorney, if you wish to communicate. With the office empty, Wasim took a moment to indulge in a little self-pity. What a morning. Two leading suspects had cut ties with him. What next? At that moment, Chief Reedley, who was passing down the corridor, stuck his head in the detective's office and asked, "Keeping in touch with the suspects? Don't forget this is a high-profile case. Want to wrap it up soon?" Yes, yes, muttered Wasim with little enthusiasm. During the half hour he awaited a pizza delivery, the detective considered Dr. Sanjay Prithawal. He noted at once that the medical man was the only suspect that was not connected directly with the theater. Was the threat of losing a medical practice sufficient motive for committing murder? Wasim ordered a background check on the doctor. Shortly after lunch, the detective paid a call on Philip Humber, a nattily attired, rosy-cheeked, and well-fed man of about 50, received him in a well-appointed office on the 19th floor of a Wilshire district high-rise. "May I offer you some coffee or a Coke?" he asked. Wasim declined the offer, but he appreciated the invitation. His smiling host seemed frank and sociable. "What can I do for you?" "I'm investigating the death of Darby Delacroix, the magician. I understand that you were his attorney. You also represent Miss Judith Rensselaer, with whom he lived. Is that correct?" "Yes." "As part of my investigation, I must consider the possibility of foul play." "But from news reports, I thought it was an accidental death." "That may be true, but I have to consider all angles. I have just learned that Mr. Delacroix was bringing legal action against a Dr. Sanjay Prithawal." "That's true, but you must realize that the case will never be presented. My client is dead. The death, of course, is not official until a death certificate has been issued. For some reason, there's been a delay." "Well, that's because certain matters connecting with his passing remain unclear. I myself am still awaiting the autopsy report." "I hope it won't be much longer. Miss Rensselaer has been pressuring me to declare her Mr. Delacroix's legal heir and to put his house up for sale. I told her that I can't do that yet. Besides, I need to contact his brother. I used the most recent address for him, the one given to me by Miss Rensselaer, but I was informed that Daniel checked out of his Geneva hotel about 5 days ago." "Miss Rensselaer says that Mr. Delacroix's estate consists almost exclusively of his residence in Hollywood, which is worth approximately $2 million. Can you confirm that?" "Unfortunately, I cannot. My office received a call yesterday from an agent of the Centurion Insurance Company. She wanted to discuss the recent changes in Mr. Delacroix's life insurance policy. No one had informed me of any changes. In view of these adjustments, there could be a substantial difference in the value of his estate." Wasim ignored every speed limit sign en route to the Spring Street office of the Centurion Insurance Company. Then he had to wait for an hour and a half for Agent Cindy Luo, who was out in the field. The petite woman with sparkling eyes and smiling face apologized profusely for her absence. Wasim melted before her. He found this woman very attractive, except for the color of her hair. If only she were blonde, he said to himself. When he finally got his mind back on business, Wasim said to her, "As the detective in charge of the investigation into the death of the famous magician, Mr. Macabre, I'm here to inquire about his life insurance policy. I understand that there are some recent changes to it." "Yes, Mr. Delacroix made a major revision just 1 month ago. He increased the face value from $250,000 to $10 million. "Wow," said Wasim. "Oh, that's not all. Under the double indemnity provision, the beneficiary will receive $20 million if his death is ruled an accident. So you see, this company is extremely anxious to know what your investigation yields. Will his death be ruled accidental?" It's too early to say. Confidentially, I think your company has a good chance of coming out well in this affair. I'll let you know as soon as possible. Wasim went to bed early with a headache. Before he could turn out the light, Corinne called. She wondered what had become of him. Despite her eagerness to talk, Wasim was cool to her. To him, having to explain police work to a woman was a waste of time. Besides, his head throbbed. He just wanted to sleep. 10 minutes is all he gave her before hanging up. The detective fell asleep, saying to himself, so many suspects, so many angles. In the office next morning, Bill Gentry tried to pull a prank on Wasim, who had a reputation as a fun-loving prankster, but the beleaguered lawman ignored him. He had no time for play. At any moment, he expected Chief Reilly to drop by and remind him of the importance of the investigation. Down the hall, he could hear Gentry saying, Wasim has changed. He's so moody these days. It was only 8:30, but the detective felt as if he'd already put in a full day's work. He slumped down in the chair at his desk. Before him lay the report of Dr. Prithawal. Born Delhi, India, April 22, 1925. Graduated Delhi University, 1947. Medical degree from Kingston University, Jamaica, 1955. Private medical practice, Seattle, Washington, 1955 to 1969. Private medical practice, Los Angeles, California, 1969 to 1979. Nothing unusual about that, thought Wasim. Was there really any value in pursuing this man? Did he kill Macabre simply to save his practice? And if so, how did he do it? Was he even at the theater that night? Wasim picked up the phone and scheduled an appointment with Dr. Prithawal. A nurse told him that the interview would have to be at 4 in the afternoon. While trying to decide how to spend the rest of the day, the detective walked down the hall, poured himself a cup of coffee, and returned to his office. Suddenly into the room burst a beaming Jeremy Takamoto. Wasim came to life. This was a member of the coroner's office. Could this be it? Yes, I have it, said Takamoto with enthusiasm. Those were the sweetest words Wasim had heard in a long time. The man removed some documents from the manila folder in his hand. There are some surprises, he added. Go on. Macabre was murdered, no doubt about it. The cause of death was poison, not the sword. What? How can that be? Apparently the killer hoped to fool us. He wiped the sword very clean, but deliberately left a tiny trace of blood on it. The blood matched the blood of the deceased. Because death had occurred close to the time of the performance, we were supposed to conclude that the sword had been the fatal instrument. However, the limited amount of blood in the coffins made us very suspicious. A careful scan of the body revealed a tiny puncture in Macabre's left arm. This led us to determine that he had been injected with a deadly, fast-acting poison. The sword was thrust into the body after he was already dead. That explains why there was so little blood in the coffins. What we can't figure out is how the killer could have poisoned the man after he came off stage, stabbed him with a sword, cleaned up so much of the blood, and placed the body into the levitating casket. He had less than 5 minutes to do all this. Yes, it's very puzzling. Say, you didn't happen to find in the deceased's pockets his wallet or his keys? We searched the theater carefully, but we couldn't locate them. No, his pockets were empty. Then how did Macabre plan to get home after the show? Without keys, he couldn't drive the van. True, but that's your problem, not ours. I know, said Wasim with a sigh. Alone again, the detective contemplated the significance of this new information. It was clearly murder, but poison? That was totally unexpected. It seemed simpler before. A fatal sword thrust required some muscle. Either the powerful Thor Stromberg had killed with premeditation, or he had been used by someone to do the killing. Of course, Macabre might have avoided the sword altogether, and then someone killed him backstage. Paul Morneau had been on the site, and he had access to the backstage areas. So did Charlie Paddock. And then there was this mysterious man in the hooded jacket. But now, poison? They say that poison is the favorite murder weapon of women. You would have to reconsider Bridget Thurston and especially Judy Rensler. Both had been at the theater that night. Bridget Thurston had omitted important information. Then she had told about the mysterious man in the basement. Was that story true or a diversion to throw suspicion in a different direction? Judy Rensler was the greatest financial beneficiary of Macabre's death, and she seemed to display no genuine remorse at his death. On the other hand, death by injection would fit neatly into the experience of the doctor. And Sanjay Prithawal had a good motive for murder. If the picture was more cloudy than ever, at least he had something solid to report to Chief Reedley. The detective gave his boss a full report right after lunch. Chief Reedley, in turn, called the mayor and reporters. Television, radio, and newspapers competed fiercely to tell the story. This was the most publicized murder in Los Angeles since the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. The accidental death of a star like Macabre had been major news, but the murder of the celebrity was sensational intelligence. Now, in police headquarters, the pressure was really on to solve the case. Wasim reached Dr. Prithawal's office 5 minutes early. He scarcely noticed the heavy-set, dark-haired nurse who escorted him to her superior. In white medical garb with puffy cheeks, large ears, and a rounded face, the physician appeared to the detective like a pig wearing spectacles. Inwardly, Wasim suppressed a laugh. Was Porky Pig capable of murder? Obviously tense, the seated doctor squinted and pressed his body forward against the desk. Ignoring his introductions, he hurriedly dismissed his aide. Then turning to the lawman, he blunted out some carefully chosen words. I had nothing to do with the murder of Mr. Delacroix. Astonished by this statement, the policeman rapidly replied, I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I am Detective Najib of the Los Angeles Police Department. My purpose in coming here is simply to gather information about the deceased man. Yes, but you know that he was suing me. You put two and two together and assumed that I was his murderer. Not at all. I did, of course, recognize that you had a motive for murder, but having a motive and actually committing a murder are two different things. This interview might result in the removal of your name from the list of suspects. I can see what you're up to. Make me relax so that I'll slip up and say something that will incriminate me. I've read about lots of innocent people who've been sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit. Maybe I should have a lawyer here. If you wish, but I doubt that's necessary. I only want to ask you some simple questions, like where you were on the night of the murder. See, that's what I mean. You already know that I was at the theater that night, so you want to blame me for Delacroix's death. Truthfully, I didn't know that you'd gone to the theater that evening. May I know why you went? It seems strange that you would attend a performance by a man who is bringing legal action against you. Well, there were two reasons. Delacroix was an amazing performer. Despite our legal quarrel, I really admired his work. I didn't want to miss such a spectacular event. In addition, I hoped to change his mind about the suit. This was my last chance before the trial. I thought that perhaps in the glow of a sensational triumph, the man would be in an expansive mood and heed my plea for dismissal of the court case. Who accompanied you to the theater that evening? I went alone. Where did you sit? A little to the right of center in the main section. Do you still have the ticket stub? No, I threw it away. Did you go backstage any time? No, what would have been the purpose? I watched Macabre's performance. And when he died, they brought down the curtain. At that point, I had no reason to go backstage. Aside from the fatal show and the treatment of the broken arm, did you have any contact with Mr. Delacroix? Yes, on 2 other occasions. In the August preceding the broken arm, I gave Mr. Delacroix a physical examination. I remember it well because he said it was his birthday, and that happened to be the day of my wedding anniversary. Was Mr. Delacroix physically fit? Oh yes, he was exceptionally fit. There are few people of any age who could match him for strength and suppleness. What about the other time you saw him? That was even farther back. It was my first encounter with Delacroix. I was called to the House of Wonder. A stagehand had suffered a scrape and a minor mishap during rehearsal. But Delacroix is the one who got my attention. He behaved so strangely over a trivial matter. I could see that the man was quite superstitious. He reminded me of villagers I used to treat in rural India. As a doctor, do you keep in store or have access to poisonous substances? Well, naturally, many medical substances are poisonous or can become poisonous if used in excessive quantities. What are you getting at? Oh, now I see. You want to blame me for Delacroix's death. I saw on television that his death has been attributed to poison. You were just using a devious line of questioning to trip me up. Please leave at once. Contact my lawyer next time you wish to communicate. Now you've done it, thought Wasim. The hat trick. 3 leading suspects who don't want to talk. That evening, the detective went to Corinne's for solace. She wanted to go to a movie. He had no desire to see a film. What could he do? He had scarcely talked to his girlfriend since the night of Macabre's performance. And what kind of movie did she choose? A detective story, naturally. Wasim fell asleep watching his screen counterpart surmount every obstacle with ease and emerge at the end of the show with a promotion and a beautiful blonde heiress. Even detectives get days off. Normally Friday was Wasim's day of rest, but with the Macabre case on his back, the detective could not afford to relax. He told Corinne that he would take her to Redondo Beach sometime after 2 in the afternoon. The morning hours were not devoted to sleep, although he needed it. Wasim spent the time tying together loose ends and planning the next week's activities. He made an important decision. He would focus exclusively on Judy Rensselaer. She had the strongest motive. She had been on the theater, even backstage on the fatal night, and she failed to express genuine sorrow. Did she have an accomplice? Paul Morneau, Thor Stromberg, Sanjay Prithawal, Charlie Paddock. All Saturday, Wasim worked to connect the woman to the poison. He and his aides vetted every pharmacy and medical supply house in the area, but no connection was established. In fact, after the first 5 days following the autopsy report, the trail grew very cold. No new suspects, no new leads. Day after day, Wasim and his colleagues rehashed the same evidence without producing novel results. While the police were failing to solve the case, pressure on them intensified. News that the famous magician Mr. Macabre had been murdered by poison right before the eyes of a large public audience led the mayor, the journalists, and the ordinary citizens of Los Angeles to demand a swift resolution of the problem. At least twice a day, Chief Reedley exhorted Wasim to step up his activity. Newspapermen and broadcasters hounded him day and night. The poor detective felt like a thief trying to climb a barbed wire fence with a pack of vicious Doberman dogs at his heels. Then harassment turned into vilification and ridicule. 3 weeks after the murder, Charlie Jenkins on the Channel 11 News suggested that there might be a cover-up by city officials and that certain high-placed but unnamed figures might have benefited from Macabre's death. Soon thereafter, Adam Castaneda, of the Star Bulletin won an award for his clever satire about the ineptness of the Los Angeles Police Department. The same newspaper followed up this story with a contest for readers. The explanation of the rules ended with this stinging line: "Perhaps some local Sherlock Holmes can compensate for the inefficiency of Detective Najib and his cronies." Wasim felt like a worm. He didn't wish to circulate in public. At restaurants, complete strangers reproached or tormented him. Even Corinne seemed a bit cool. But what more could he do? He was already doing his best. As time passed, the pitiful man grasped at every straw. When a new interview with Thor Stromberg revealed the fact that Bridget Thurston's brother worked at a pharmacy, Wasim exulted as though he had achieved a major breakthrough. It turned out that Monty Thurston developed film and had no access to drugs. A month later, the detective got excited upon discovering that Charlie Paddock owned a van. But research showed that it had been undergoing repairs on the fatal day. 6 months after the murder, Judy Rensler paid the detective a brief visit. Darby Delacroix's estate had been settled. The Centurion Insurance Company had reluctantly compensated his beneficiary, and the Hollywood Hills home had been sold. The magician's lover was now a very rich woman. She asked to be freed of the restraint on her movement that had been imposed by the Los Angeles Police Department. Wasim squirmed inside. He didn't want to let this woman go. She was still his primary suspect. But what could he do? If he refused to grant her wish, an attorney would get a judge to make him comply. Recognizing the futility of resistance, he asked the woman where she planned to live. Rensler replied, "I haven't decided, but it will be somewhere outside of California." Another half-year later, the case was officially closed. A final report said that Darby Delacroix had died at the hands of an unknown killer. By that time, the humiliation and worry had worn off a bit. Although Wasim could never forget the stain on his record, little by little, things got back to normal. He resumed his fun-loving, prankish behavior. Eventually, he married Corinne. Though childless, the marriage was happy. Wasim's hair grew thinner, and Corinne's figure grew thicker. Proof that the police department had forgiven its disgraced detective appeared years after the murder. Wasim was promoted to captain in 1983. This is the end of part 1. Unfortunately, you'll have to wait 2 weeks to hear the conclusion of the story. In the interim, you can decide who killed Macabre, the motive, and the manner in which the victim was dispatched. Replay the story, for there are clues. Part 2 will appear March 15th. Remember that I retain the copyright to all of my works. Thank you for watching Dramas, Dreams, and Drollery.